Hi, I am Hercule Poirot, and welcome to my new mystery case.
The storm had rolled in over Emberlight Park with the hauteur of a grand performer demanding a stage. By dusk, the long windows of the manor glowed like captive lanterns, casting fractured amber beams onto the sweeping lawns. Inside, the guests assembled with the strained joviality of those accustomed to hiding their true feelings beneath polished manners. It was the evening of Lady Clarissa Darcy's annual winter salon, an occasion renowned for elegance, intrigue, and an unspoken competition of social influence. The great drawing room, shaped in a generous oval and dominated by an enormous marble fireplace, served as the natural center of the night's festivities. Its flames danced vigorously, throwing shifting shadows across the paneled walls, shadows that stretched, recoiled, and twisted in ways that made even the most composed guest glance twice. At precisely 8:30, the first scream shattered the polite conversation like a shard of crystal striking stone. It came from Miss Eloise March, a timid young woman whose talents for watercolor and melodrama were often subjects of discussion among the artistic guests. Her cry was so piercing that Lady Clarissa's Venetian glass slipped from her hand and shattered upon the parquet floor. Yet no one noticed the sound. All eyes were fixed on the fireplace. There, half tumbled against the marble hearth, lay Sir Benedict Harwood. The baronet's evening coat was rumpled, his cravat disordered, and his face contorted in a manner both shocked and strangely serene. A silver letter opener protruded from just beneath his ribs, its ornate handle glinting in the firelight as though mocking the gasps rising around it. The flames behind him snapped loudly, illuminating his stillness with a wicked warmth. A hush fell, a collective inhalation of disbelief. It was Lady Clarissa who first found her voice. "Good heavens! Benedict, someone fetch Dr. Wykeham at once." But Dr. Wykeham, it turned out, was already at Sir Benedict's side, his trained hands moving with steady speed, yet lacking any trace of hope. Within seconds, the physician rose and looked at the assembly with a grave composure that told the truth before he spoke it. "Sir Benedict is dead." A murmur rippled through the room, shock, fear, and something harder to identify. Guilt, anticipation, relief. No one could say. Outside, thunder crashed across the sky as if nature itself wished to lower a curtain upon the tableau. The guests, 8 in total, now seemed etched in that moment, each with their own expression of horror or calculated concern. Miss Eloise clutched a chaise to steady herself. Lord Adrian Markham's brow knit with something that resembled fury. Mrs. Lillian Trent, wrapped in pearls, merely blinked, her face a study in controlled neutrality. Lady Clarissa stood nearest to the body, her fingers trembling as she pressed them to her throat. "This is impossible. Who could? Why would anyone harm Benedict here in my home?" No one answered. Not yet. But a few exchanged fleeting looks, nervous, knowing, or perhaps fearful of what the night might yet unveil. In the far corner, the grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, its mellow tones both solemn and strangely accusatory. It was Miss Eloise who spoke next, though her voice was scarcely above a whisper. His last words. He said something before he went to warm himself by the fire. Something about a shadow he saw. Something that frightened him. The guests turned toward her in unison. "What shadow?" Lord Markham demanded. "There is only one entrance to this room, and we should have noticed anyone approaching." Miss Eloise shook her head. "He said it wasn't someone. It was a shadow that should not be cast." This remark unsettled the room far more than the thunder outside. More than a simple intruder, it suggested something inexplicable, or at least something cleverly disguised. Before any guest could question her further, a sharp rap came at the double doors. As the butler swung them open, a man stepped into the threshold, removing his impeccable bowler hat with a courteous nod. His waxed mustaches were unmistakably precise, his bearing serene despite the tension that instantly flooded toward him like a wave. "I beg your pardon for my intrusion," he said, in a voice touched with a graceful Belgian accent. "There has been a most unfortunate motor collision on the road outside your estate. My driver and I were seeking temporary shelter from the storm." Lady Clarissa blinked in recognition. "Surely, not the famous Monsieur Poirot?" Hercule Poirot inclined his head. "I am indeed he. But I see," his eyes swept calmly to the body near the fireplace, "that I arrive at a moment of even greater misfortune." For a brief instant, the storm quieted as though listening. Poirot surveyed the room, taking in every face, every posture, every flicker of reaction. There was no chaos in his gaze, only a meticulous appraisal, refined by years of observing human folly. "My friends," he said gently, "I believe it would be wise to close the doors. Until the constabulary arrives, we must ensure that no one leaves." His dark eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "For it is clear that among you stands the murderer." The doors closed with a subdued but final click, as though sealing the room into a prism of tension. Lady Clarissa steadied herself and nodded faintly to the butler, who at once withdrew to telephone the authorities. The fireplace crackled again, insistently, its flames casting uneven light across the guests who had now become suspects by mere proximity. Poirot advanced only a few steps, positioning himself where he could observe each face without obstruction. Nothing in his manner suggested intrusion. Rather, he seemed to settle naturally into the center of the room as if invited. "I regret the necessity," he said softly. "But when a man dies in such circumstances, order is the best companion, and order, it seems, has not been much respected tonight." His gaze traveled to Sir Benedict's body, then returned to the living with pointed calm. "Perhaps one of you could enlighten me as to the nature of this gathering." Lady Clarissa swallowed hard. "The Winter Salon. It is an annual evening of conversation, music, and, well, inspiration. Benedict was an old friend, though we had recent disagreements." She faltered. "But never anything like this." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. "And who among you was the last to speak with him?" A silence followed, taut as a violin string. Then Mrs. Lillian Trent, the pearl-draped figure who had previously shown little emotion, raised a gloved hand with delicate restraint. "He spoke briefly with me before wandering toward the fire. He complained of a chill, but beyond that, nothing of consequence." Lord Adrian Markham scoffed quietly. "Nothing of consequence? Forgive me, Lillian, but Benedict had seemed troubled for weeks. If he confided in anyone, it would be you." Her eyes flashed. "You overestimate our intimacy, Adrian. Not every conversation between friends conceals a secret." Poirot watched them with great interest. "You two know Sir Benedict well, I think." "Since childhood," Markham replied, adjusting his cuffs as though tidying away irritation. "Which is precisely why this is impossible." "He was loved," Mrs. Trent said softly. "Or at least respected." "Loved?" Miss Eloise whispered from behind her trembling hands. "But someone here must have hated him." Poirot turned toward her. "Mademoiselle March, you were the first to see him fall. Did you notice anything unusual just beforehand?" She shivered. Only that he seemed surprised. He stood very still for a moment, as though staring at something in the flames, and then he staggered." Dr. Wykeham interjected, his tone crisp. "The wound is fresh. There would have been no time for staggering. The blade struck with precision." Poirot lifted a brow. "You speak with certainty, Doctor. You observed the wound closely." "As closely as one can before the authorities arrive. But I assure you it was deliberate and expertly placed." "Expertly," Poirot repeated, the word lingering. His attention shifted to the young pianist near the sideboard. Julian Harwood, Sir Benedict's nephew, slender, with anxious eyes that darted like minnows. "Monsieur Harwood, you have said little." Julian swallowed, his voice barely emerging. I wish I had something to say. My uncle was not a kind man, but he did not deserve this. I was tuning my instrument in the music alcove when the scream came. I saw nothing. You did not notice anyone approach the fireplace before Sir Benedict? Poirot asked. No, but I assumed he wished to step away from us all. He disliked large gatherings. Poirot allowed the room to settle again before speaking. Madame Darcy, were there any staff near the drawing-room? Only Filton, the butler, and myself, she said. The others were preparing the supper room. Then access to this room was quite controlled. Poirot tapped his fingertips together, meaning the killer is here, among us. No one moved. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, uncertain whether to persist. Poirot approached the fireplace, kneeling with deliberate grace. The flames revealed little beyond their restless dance, but his eyes studied the hearthstone, the rug, and the pattern of ash as though deciphering an ancient text. A faint scent lingered. Smoke, wax, and something harder to place, metallic and cold. Curious, he murmured. The hearth has been swept recently. Lady Clarissa blinked. Filton tends it hourly when a reception is underway. Ah, yet Sir Benedict's shoes bear soot, and there is a smear beside the grate. Poirot rose again. Someone else stood here shortly before him, someone who wished to observe the fire or to hide something within it. Markham stiffened visibly. Hide something? Poirot's moustaches lifted. People hide all manner of objects when circumstances encourage them. A sudden gust rattled the window panes, and Miss Eloise flinched. But why? Why would any of us— Poirot gestured gently for calm. Mademoiselle, fear clouds the little grey cells. Tonight, more than ever, we must see with clarity. Filton re-entered then, his composure impeccable. The constabulary has been notified, my lady. They will arrive within the half-hour. Thank you, Lady Clarissa murmured. Poirot stepped nearer to her, lowering his voice. Madame, may I ask, did Sir Benedict quarrel with anyone tonight? She hesitated. Not publicly, but earlier I overheard raised voices in the study. When I approached, the door opened and Benedict stormed out. Adrian was behind him. Instantly, all eyes turned to Markham. He bristled. We disagreed about a financial matter, nothing that would lead to murder. And what was the subject of this financial disagreement? Poirot asked. Markham hesitated for a fraction too long. That, Poirot said softly, is noted. Mrs. Trent exhaled sharply. Julian shifted, guilt or anxiety making his stance uneven. Dr. Wykeham smoothed his sleeve to disguise unease. One by one, Poirot catalogued their discomforts with eyes that missed nothing, but it was Miss Eloise who whispered the question, trembling in all their minds. Monsieur Poirot, do you think the shadow Benedict saw has anything to do with the murderer? Poirot turned toward the fire once more. In my experience, mademoiselle, he said quietly, shadows often reveal more truth than the light. For a long moment, Poirot remained near the fire, studying the restless flames as though the truth might be hidden in their flickering depths. The guests watched him with mounting apprehension, each uncertain whether his silence signaled revelation or merely contemplation. At last he turned, his expression serene yet sharpened by purpose, and addressed them in a tone both courteous and unyielding. I should like to understand the movements of each person in this room during the quarter hour before Sir Benedict fell. Precision, you see, is a friend to truth. Lord Markham crossed his arms. You expect us to reconstruct every moment. The storm has muddled everything. Poirot's eyebrow rose a fraction. On the contrary, monsieur. Storms clarify memory. They create contrast. You will remember what you did because the atmosphere made it impossible to act without awareness. His gaze drifted to Mrs. Trent. Madame, perhaps you will begin. She startled faintly, though her poise returned quickly. I stood near the card table with Lady Clarissa. discussing arrangements for next month's charity gala. We did not move from that area. Lady Clarissa nodded. It is true. Lillian remained with me the entire time. Poirot regarded them both, noting the synchronization of their statements, the practiced harmony in their tones. Very well. And you, Dr. Wycombe? The physician straightened. I was in the adjoining corridor, reviewing a message from my surgery, and returned only moments before the scream. I saw no one approach Sir Benedict. Convenient, Markham muttered under his breath. Wycombe's jaw tightened. If you imply I had reason to harm him, you are sorely mistaken. Poirot intervened gently. We will not quarrel. Precision, not hostility, will uncover the truth. Monsieur Harwood, your recollection, if you please. Julian's hands twisted together. As I said earlier, I was in the music alcove. I never left it. The piano stool can confirm that, I suppose. The stool? Markham scoffed. Do you expect us to believe furniture vouches for innocence? Julian flushed. I mean that I was in the middle of adjusting its height before Eloise screamed. Anyone can check. Poirot tapped a thoughtful finger against his sleeve. And you, Mademoiselle Marche? Eloise hesitated. I was walking toward the fireplace myself. I wanted to warm my hands. I saw Sir Benedict reach it just before I did. I looked away for a moment and then he collapsed. You saw no one near him? Poirot asked. No one. But the shadows were strange. They moved oddly. The fire was brighter than before, as though someone fed it. A ripple passed through the room, subtle yet palpable. Poirot fixed his eyes on her. You are certain of this? She nodded. It flared suddenly, a burst of light. Poirot stepped toward the hearth once more, crouching to inspect the embers. The guests leaned nearer despite themselves. The crackling logs emitted steady heat, yet something in their arrangement, something in the fine scatter of ash, stirred suspicion. Has anyone added wood to the fire tonight? He asked. Lady Clarissa shook her head slowly. Filton lit it earlier, yes, but none of us touched it afterwards. Poirot examined the charred remains, then lifted a small brass poker, turning it between his fingers. Someone has tended the fire, he murmured. Recently. Markham bristled. Perhaps Benedict did. He was always fussing with things. No, Poirot said softly. The angle of the poker's soot suggests a different hand. His gaze swept to each face, waiting for the flicker of unease, the involuntary tightening of the mouth, the twitch of guilt. Some avoided his eyes. Others held fast. All revealed more than they intended. Before he could question further, Filton reappeared in the doorway. Monsieur Poirot, the authorities are delayed, flooding on the South Road. They estimate 20 minutes. Poirot nodded. Then for 20 minutes we maintain order ourselves. Filton bowed and withdrew, closing the doors once more. Poirot turned to Markham. You argued with Sir Benedict earlier. You admit this freely. What was the subject? Markham exhaled sharply. He wished to withdraw his support from a joint investment. I believed his decision irrational. We exchanged words, yes, but that hardly constitutes murder. And yet, Poirot said softly, men do not quarrel without reason. What did he accuse you of? Markham's cheeks reddened. That is private. Private matters, Poirot replied, often become public when death intrudes. Lady Clarissa interjected, distressed. Adrian, if there is anything that might help. There isn't, Markham snapped, then visibly restrained himself. I told Benedict that dissolving the partnership would be disastrous for us both. He refused to listen. That is all. Poirot regarded him a moment longer, then shifted his attention. Dr. Wycombe, you stated the wound was inflicted expertly. Might such precision indicate familiarity between killer and victim? Wycombe frowned. Possibly. The angle suggests the assailant stood close. Very close. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Close enough to speak? Close enough to be trusted? No one answered. The fire hissed, sending sparks drifting upward like unspoken confessions. Julian suddenly stepped forward, voice trembling. Monsieur Poirot, may I say something? Earlier today, my uncle received a letter. He was visibly shaken by it. He locked himself in the study for nearly an hour. Lady Clarissa gasped softly. I had no idea. Markham stiffened. What kind of letter? Julian shook his head. I don't know. He burned it immediately after reading. I only saw the ashes. Poirot's interest sharpened. Burned, you say? An unusual action for a man who treasured correspondence. It frightened him, Julian whispered. I could tell. Poirot looked toward the flames again, as though the ashes of another message might still linger there. Was anyone aware of this letter besides you? Julian hesitated. I thought I heard voices while he was in the study. Raised voices. 2 of them. The room tightened with sudden tension. Whose voices? Poirot asked. Julian swallowed hard. I believe one belonged to Mrs. Trent. For a moment, the room seemed to stop breathing. Mrs. Trent's hand, graceful even in shock, flew to her throat as though steadying a delicate chain. Her composure cracked, not entirely broken, but strained enough for Poirot to observe the fine fissures. She faced Julian with a tight, incredulous whisper. You believe you heard my voice in an argument? The young man shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowered. I cannot swear it, Mrs. Trent, but the tone, sharp, urgent, sounded like yours. She stepped back as though clearing space around her innocence. I was with Lady Clarissa all afternoon. She can confirm it. Lady Clarissa hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her expression before discipline smoothed it away. Lillian and I were indeed together for much of the afternoon, but we separated briefly when I went to oversee the arrangements in the conservatory. Only 10 minutes, perhaps less. Poirot seized upon the detail with immediate interest. He turned his attention fully upon Mrs. Trent, who offered a calm, practiced smile. If Benedict received a disturbing letter, I assure you it had nothing to do with me. But her voice trembled on the final word, enough to betray that assurance was far from complete. Poirot began pacing slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Let us consider, then, why Sir Benedict might burn a letter and then argue with someone shortly after. A financial matter, a personal grievance, a threat. People burn only what they fear others might see. Markham exhaled impatiently. You're assuming far too much from a single claim. Julian admits he only heard something. He cannot confirm who was present. Yet Poirot's little grey cells were not inclined toward assumption. They leaned toward pattern. He stopped before Mrs. Trent. Madame, you have not yet explained what your relationship with Sir Benedict truly was. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. We were friends. Nothing more. Friends who quarreled? Poirot asked. Friends who perhaps shared confidences. Her jaw tightened. You are implying scandal where none exists? Poirot nodded, as though accepting her denial while filing its tone away for future examination. Before he could probe further, Eloise let out a soft gasp. The shadows, she whispered. If someone argued with Benedict in the study, might that same person have tampered with the fire? Perhaps they destroyed something else, something they wished no one to find. Poirot's eyes brightened subtly. A possibility. The hearth is an excellent accomplice. Warm, hungry, indiscriminate. He knelt once more, examining the ashes with meticulous care. And yet there is something peculiar here, a faint residue of wax upon the grate. Dr. Wykeham stepped forward, frowning. Wax? Perhaps a candle drip. Poirot shook his head. This is not from a candle. This is sealing wax. Burned recently, I suspect. A ripple coursed through the group as the implication settled. Sealing wax suggested documents. Documents deliberately destroyed. Julian paled. Then the letter he burned may not have been the only one. Just so, Poirot said, rising, which means that someone wished to erase more than words. They wished to erase proof. Markham looked away, fingers tapping restlessly against his sleeve. Mrs. Trent's calm had grown brittle. Dr. Wycomb's expression hardened into something unreadable. Eloise clutched her shawl tightly, as though fearing the shadows might seize her next. Poirot let the silence thicken, drawing out each person's discomfort. Human truth rarely surfaced in still water. It appeared amidst ripples. At last, Lady Clarissa broke the tension. Monsieur Poirot, if someone tampered with the fire, then they must have approached the hearth before Benedict, but Eloise saw no one. Poirot nodded gently. Because the fire was adjusted earlier, I believe the tampering occurred before Sir Benedict arrived in this room tonight, perhaps when the guests mingled freely. But who would risk such a thing? She murmured. Anyone who believed they would go unnoticed amid conversation, Poirot replied. Anyone who knew Benedict would eventually come to the fireplace. He was always cold, Julian whispered. He sought the fire constantly. Poirot's brows lifted. Then the killer relied upon his habits. An important insight, mon ami. Markham stepped forward with renewed agitation. This is absurd speculation. You speak of motives and shadows and ashes, yet you ignore the simplest point. Someone must have physically approached Benedict and stabbed him. That requires opportunity, not wax and habit. Poirot regarded him with patient amusement. Opportunity, monsieur, is nothing without motive, and motive is nothing without understanding human behavior. Tonight, behavior speaks louder than blades. Markham faltered, then shot a glance toward Mrs. Trent, who stiffened defensively under the weight of suspicion. Poirot, noting the exchange, shifted his focus. Mrs. Trent, earlier you claimed you had no disagreement with Sir Benedict, but your reaction to Julian's statement suggests more. Her lips pressed thin. I am merely offended by the accusation. Benedict and I had a cordial friendship, nothing more. Julian looked at her, brow furrowed. But I heard fear in his voice. He said something like, "You cannot do this." The room contracted with stillness. Mrs. Trent's breath caught. You misheard, she said quickly, or imagined it. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. Madame, when lies are told, they leave a scent, delicate but perceptible. You know something of the letter, do you not? She met his gaze fiercely, but only for a moment. Then her shoulders drooped. I knew Benedict was troubled, she murmured, but he would not confide in me. That is all I will say. Poirot observed her a moment longer, then turned away, letting her silence hang unanswered. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the storm outside, and the lights flickered overhead. Eloise whimpered, startled, while Markham muttered about the cursed weather. Poirot, however, remained still. Nature grows impatient, he said softly, and so must we. There is one person whose account tonight lacks clarity. His gaze swept the room before settling on Dr. Wycombe. Doctor, I would hear again where you were during the crucial minutes, and this time, with precision. Dr. Wycombe did not flinch, but a faint tightening around his eyes betrayed that Poirot's sudden focus unsettled him. He adjusted his spectacles with deliberate calm. I have already told you, Monsieur Poirot, I stepped into the corridor to read a message from my surgery. When I returned, Sir Benedict had already fallen. I cannot add more than that. Poirot gave a small, almost sympathetic nod. Just so. And yet I find myself curious. You are a man of science. When you examine a body, you do not guess. You observe. You spoke earlier of expertise in the wound. Expertise suggests familiarity, with the blade, with the angle, with the victim's build. Is this not so? Wycombe hesitated. A professional observation, nothing more. But one that requires closeness, Poirot replied softly. Intimacy, even. One cannot judge so swiftly unless the mind has already prepared the judgment. The physician stiffened. You accuse me, then? I accuse no one, Poirot said, lifting a hand in gentle denial. I merely seek clarity, and clarity often resists those who rush to appear innocent. Wycomb's gaze sharpened. I was in the corridor. Alone. Alone, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. A word that removes witnesses, but not opportunity. Markham exhaled in irritation. Poirot, you're twisting his words. A man cannot conjure witnesses from thin air. The corridor was likely empty. Likely, Poirot echoed. But I do not deal in likelihood. Only truth. Before Markham could retort, Eloise spoke timidly. Doctor, when you examined him, you seemed so certain, as though you expected to find him dead. Wycombe shot her a dark look. My dear Miss March, one does not survive a blade in the heart. But Poirot's eyes glimmered. But that is precisely what intrigues me. You knew instantly that it was the heart, without turning him fully, without examining the trajectory. Wycombe's face reddened. I saw enough. It is not difficult for a trained physician. Poirot regarded him for a silent moment, then inclined his head as though shelving the observation. Julian, emboldened by the shift of suspicion, stepped forward, though fear tripped through his voice. Dr. Wycombe worked with my uncle for years, did he not? Uncle Benedict financed some of his medical initiatives. Philanthropic ventures, Wycombe corrected sharply. Nothing more. Were you still aligned? Julian pressed. Wycombe's lips thinned. Our professional relationship ended months ago. Poirot turned slightly. Ended? Why? Wycombe hesitated. Benedict withdrew his financial support. He claimed the research lacked commercial promise, though that was never its intent. Poirot let the silence draw out, letting each guest judge that motive for themselves. And you did not resent him? He asked quietly. Resentment, Wycombe repeated coldly, is not in my nature. On the contrary, Poirot murmured, human nature is remarkably consistent. It surprises only those who refuse to look. Before Wycombe could respond, Lady Clarissa intervened with trembling civility. Perhaps we should all take a breath. This room feels like a tinderbox. A most apt metaphor, Poirot said gently, especially given the state of the fireplace. His eyes swept the guests once more. There is still the matter of the sealing wax. Someone burned a sealed document tonight, and I suspect Sir Benedict was aware of its significance. His gaze rested on Mrs. Trent for a beat, then glided past her to Markham, who shifted uneasily beneath scrutiny. Monsieur Markham, if Sir Benedict wished to withdraw from your business partnership, perhaps he documented his reasons. Financial disputes are often committed to paper. Markham's jaw clenched. If Benedict wrote such a document, I have not seen it. But you might have wished to, Poirot said softly, especially if it contained accusations. Accusations? Markham snapped. What accusations? Poirot regarded him steadily. You tell me, monsieur. The fire popped sharply, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The sound punctuated the thick silence that followed. Eloise's voice emerged tremulously. Monsieur Poirot, if the letter frightened Benedict, perhaps it named someone here, someone he feared. Then the burning of it, Poirot said, would serve two purposes, concealment and urgency. But whose urgency? Julian looked between the faces, searching for truth, finding only secrecy. Poirot, you think the murderer might have tried to destroy the letter earlier, then confronted him later? Perhaps, Poirot said. But consider also that the letter may not have threatened him. It may have threatened someone else, and he learned something dangerous. Mrs. Trent let out a brittle laugh. This is becoming melodramatic. Madame, Poirot replied, Tonight, melodrama and murder walk hand in hand. He moved toward the study door, visible at the far end of the drawing room. I believe it would be most enlightening to inspect the study. If there are remnants of the burnt letter, they will be there. If a quarrel took place, perhaps traces remain. The room will speak even if people do not. Markham frowned. You intend to search the house before the police arrive? With Lady Clarissa's permission, naturellement. Lady Clarissa hesitated, then gave a solemn nod. If it helps uncover the truth, you may examine whatever you need. Merci, madame. He stepped toward the door, then paused, turning back to the group. But before I proceed, one thing must be clear. No one leaves this room unless accompanied. The murderer hopes to conceal panic beneath composure, but movement reveals much, and I cannot permit further opportunities for mischief. Wycombe bristled. You suspect us all? I do, Poirot answered calmly. For in a room where one man has died, trust is a luxury we cannot yet afford. He nodded to Filton, who stepped forward silently to accompany him. Just as Poirot's hand touched the study door, Eloise let out a sudden, strangled gasp. Wait, look! All eyes turned. Sir Benedict's body, still near the fireplace, had shifted. Not by a human hand, not by the movement of air, but by something small and metallic sliding from his inner coat pocket. A thin silver key, glinting coldly in the firelight before coming to rest upon the rug. Poirot froze. A key that chooses its own moment to appear, he murmured. How very interesting. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silver key lay gleaming like a sliver of moonlight caught on the rug, its edges softened by fire-glow, yet unmistakably deliberate in its emergence. Poirot approached slowly, crouching with exquisite care, as though the key might flee if startled. He did not touch it at once. Instead, he examined its position, the faint indentation it made in the fibers, the angle at which it had fallen. Only when he had gathered these silent details did he lift it delicately between thumb and forefinger. A key, he murmured, turning it toward the light. But to what? Julian stepped nearer, eyes wide. I've never seen it before. My uncle kept his personal keys in a leather pouch, not in his inner pocket. Poirot arched a brow. Then this key was meant to be hidden, and yet it emerges now. Why? Bodies shift subtly as they cool, but not enough for an object so securely placed to fall by chance. His gaze sharpened. Something, or someone, disturbed it earlier. Mrs. Trent swallowed. Are you suggesting the killer searched him after he died? Poirot did not answer directly. Tell me, does anyone here recognize it? He held the key up. Its bow was ornate, shaped with elegant flourishes, not the utilitarian design of a household lock. Lady Clarissa frowned. It resembles none of the keys in this house, and I assure you, we do not possess locks requiring such a design. Poirot pocketed the key gently. Then it belongs to Sir Benedict's private affairs, perhaps a safety box, a cabinet, a drawer one keeps hidden even in familiar surroundings. Markham sighed impatiently. Must every trinket become a grand mystery? A man of Benedict's wealth carries keys. You are reading too much into it. Ah, Poirot said softly. But I read only what is written. You, monsieur, prefer not to see what troubles you. Markham stiffened, but said no more. Poirot continued toward the study door, but this time the atmosphere around him had changed. The key had unsettled them all, not by its existence, but by its timing, like a whispered admission from the dead. Filton held the door for him, and the guests stood in a tense semicircle, watching with breath held between dread and curiosity. Poirot paused on the threshold, looking back once more. Remain where you are, if you please. This will not take long. With that, he stepped inside the study. The room greeted him with a stillness that carried the memory of recent turmoil. A heavy oak desk dominated the center, its surface neat but not immaculate. Papers were stacked, though not uniformly, and a blotter lay skewed as though set down in haste. A faint scent of burned paper lingered, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable to Poirot's trained senses. Filton closed the door behind them but remained silently by it, respectful, yet observant. Poirot moved first to the fireplace. It was smaller than the one in the drawing-room, its embers reduced to dull orange. A metal tray beneath the grate held the remnants of something recently burned. He crouched, lifting the tray carefully. Charred fragments fluttered like blackened petals. "Ah," he whispered. "Not one letter, but two." Filton leaned closer. "Two, sir." Poirot pointed to the layering of ash. "The texture differs. The upper layer is crisp, recently burned. The lower, older by hours, not minutes. Sir Benedict burned something before the guests arrived, then again shortly before his death." Filton's brow knit. Surely he would not destroy two separate documents unless they were connected, Poirot finished softly. Or unless someone persuaded him. He stood, scanning the room. His eyes drifted to the waste bin. A small scrap peeked from beneath crumpled stationery, overlooked amid the chaos. Poirot retrieved it, smoothing it gently. Only half a line of handwriting remained, saved from the fire by some merciful accident. "Cannot protect you once." Poirot felt the shift internally, a quiet confirmation of the direction his thoughts had taken. He folded the scrap and slipped it into his pocket with the silver key. Returning his attention to the desk, he inspected the drawers. All were unlocked, except the top right. Its keyhole shape matched the ornate key now in Poirot's possession. He paused, savoring the quiet inevitability of the moment, before inserting the key and turning it with a soft click. Inside lay a single leather-bound notebook. Poirot lifted it reverently. The cover bore no title. Its pages, when opened, revealed Benedict's neat handwriting, notes, dates, observations, names. Some lines were underlined with unusual emphasis. Others had been crossed out violently. One page in particular made Poirot inhale deeply. He closed the notebook slowly, thoughtfully. "This," he murmured, "is not the diary of a peaceful man." Filton shifted uneasily. "What have you found, sir?" A truth Benedict feared, but not enough to escape. Poirot tucked the notebook beneath his arm. "Come, Filton. We return to the drawing-room. They must hear what can be safely revealed and what cannot." They stepped back into the hall. As the study door clicked shut, a sudden crash of thunder reverberated through the estate. The lights dimmed, recovered, then flickered again. Filton steadied a nearby console lamp, muttering about the frailty of the electrical liners in such weather. But Poirot's focus had already moved ahead, toward the drawing-room where tension simmered like a pot nearing boil. When he entered, all conversation ceased instantly. Markham's impatience, Mrs. Trent's quiet dread, Julian's fragile anxiety, Eloise's trembling curiosity, every face lifted toward him, searching for answers or ammunition. Poirot placed the notebook on a side table without opening it. "Mes amis," he began softly, "I have discovered something of importance. Sir Benedict was engaged in matters most delicate, matters involving at least one person in this room." A collective gasp rose, though some reactions were more measured than others. "But before I speak further," Poirot continued, "I must ask a question. A simple question, yet one whose answer may unravel much." His eyes moved across the room with precision, settling, quite purposefully, on Mrs. Trent. "Madame," he said gently, "why did you visit Sir Benedict's study earlier today?" Mrs. Anne Trent did not answer at once. Her breath caught, faint yet unmistakable, as though Poirot's question struck a place she had hoped was safely hidden behind her polished composure. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, its glow casting restless shapes across her face. She lifted her chin, attempting a calm she did not possess. "I did not visit Benedict's study," she said. The words were steady, but the pause before them had betrayed her. Poirot's gaze softened, not with sympathy, but with the patience of a man accustomed to peeling back layers of human denial. Madame, the truth is like the flame. Cover it, and it flickers. Allow it air, and it reveals all. Let us give it air, yes? Mrs. Trent's lips parted in protest, but her eyes darted briefly toward Lady Clarissa, as though seeking silent reinforcement. That flicker, small, involuntary, was enough for Poirot. "Lady Clarissa," he said gently, "did Mrs. Trent come to you after visiting the study?" Clarissa's composure trembled. She folded her hands, indecisive. Lillian seemed distressed earlier, but she did not say where she had been. Markham exhaled sharply. "This is absurd. Even if she did go to the study, it doesn't mean she argued with Benedict." "No," Poirot agreed calmly, "but it would mean she had reason to." Mrs. Trent's eyes flashed. "Monsieur Poirot, you do not understand." "Then help me understand," he replied, taking a small step closer. "Why did Sir Benedict write your name in his notebook?" She paled. Julian's gasp cut through the thickening tension. His notebook. What did he write? Poirot did not answer. He kept his gaze upon Mrs. Trent, allowing the question to simmer. "Mrs." Trent closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. When she opened them again, the veneer of social grace had thinned to something raw. "Benedict and I had a disagreement," she whispered, "earlier today. But it was not a quarrel. It was—" She hesitated, searching for a word. None came easily. "It was a plea." "A plea," Poirot repeated softly. Her shoulders sagged. "He asked for my help. He said he had discovered something dangerous, something that could ruin him or someone else. He wouldn't say what, only that he was frightened. I thought he was exaggerating, as he so often did when facing financial or political embarrassment. But this was no embarrassment," Poirot murmured. "This was fear." Mrs. Trent nodded slowly. "He showed me something in the study. A paper. I didn't see the contents, he kept it folded, but I saw enough to know it frightened him. And this paper," Poirot said, "is now ash." Eloise shivered. "Then you did hear voices," she whispered to Julian. "You truly heard her with him?" Mrs. Trent turned sharply. "I did not raise my voice. I swear it. Benedict begged me not to speak to anyone of what he showed me. He said he needed time to decide what to do." Markham scoffed. "And did you comply?" Mrs. Trent hesitated again. Poirot seized the moment. "Madame," he said softly, "did you perhaps speak to someone else? Someone who might have felt threatened by what Sir Benedict discovered?" Her silence stretched. Markham stepped forward, agitation rising. "Lillian, who was it?" She shook her head. "I cannot. I gave my word." Poirot interrupted softly. "Your word to a dead man no longer shields the living. If you speak the truth now, it may yet prevent another tragedy tonight." Another tragedy. The phrase lingered ominously, drawing every eye toward Poirot. Mrs. Trent's resolve wavered visibly. Then, with a trembling breath, she spoke. "I told one person." The room tensed like a tightened string. "Who?" Markham demanded. She looked at him, her eyes sorrowful. "You, Adrian." The accusation landed like a stone in still water. Markham recoiled. "Me? That's ridiculous. Why would she confide in me?" "Because," Mrs. Trent whispered, "you asked." She turned to the rest of them. "Adrian approached me earlier, before the party began. He said Benedict seemed different, troubled. He asked if I knew anything. I admitted Benedict had shown me something. I told him only that it involved money and a betrayal." Markham's face drained of color. "You twist my words. I asked out of concern." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Concern, monsieur, can wear many faces. When Sir Benedict sought to withdraw from your business partnership, it was not merely a financial inconvenience, was it? Markham opened his mouth, closed it again. He accused you of something, Poirot continued, his tone quiet but relentless. What was it? Markham shook his head. Nothing. He was paranoid, irrational. And yet, Poirot said, paranoia does not explain the burned documents nor the fear in his final hours. Julian stepped toward Markham, trembling. If you were involved in some betrayal. Markham whirled on him. I did nothing. Benedict misunderstood my intentions. That's all. Enough, Poirot said gently, raising a hand. We will return to Monsieur Markham's role shortly. For now, we stay with what is certain. Sir Benedict possessed information someone desperately wished to hide. Mrs. Trent saw only a glimpse, yet even that glimpse placed her at risk. And now, he tapped his pocket lightly, where the key rested. The key appears. Lady Clarissa shivered. Monsieur Poirot, does the key unlock what Benedict feared? Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Or perhaps it unlocks why he died. Eloise clutched her shawl. And if the murderer knows what it opens? Poirot looked at the glowing embers of the fireplace. Then tonight is far from over. Before anyone could speak again, a faint sound echoed from somewhere deep within the house. A distant creak, soft but deliberate, unmistakably the sound of footsteps on old wood. Every head turned toward the corridor. Filton stiffened. No one should be there, sir. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Then someone walks who should not. The storm thundered, shaking the windows. Poirot straightened fully, gaze alert. Mes amis, he said quietly, the murderer is not yet finished. Stay where you are. And with that, he moved toward the corridor, each step measured, each breath calm, as the shadows of Emberlight Park stirred once more. The corridor stretched before Poirot like a dim artery of the house, narrow and lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow his every step. The storm outside moaned against the window panes, the wind threading through cracks like a whisper urging secrecy. Filton walked just behind him, lantern in hand, its glow revealing dust motes drifting lazily in the still air. Poirot held up a hand, halting them both. The faint footsteps had come from ahead, somewhere near the east wing, yet now the silence felt unnaturally complete, as though the house itself held its breath. You are certain no guest or servant should be in this area? Poirot asked quietly. Positive, sir, Filton replied. The east wing is unused during winter. The doors remain locked unless Lady Clarissa instructs otherwise. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Locked, you say? And yet someone walks there. They resumed forward motion, the lantern casting long shadows that leapt nervously along the corridor walls. As they approached the junction where the passage branched toward the east wing, a faint metallic clatter echoed, small but too deliberate to be the settling of an old house. Poirot quickened his steps, turning the corner sharply. The door to the east wing, ordinarily shut, hung slightly ajar. He stepped closer and noticed fresh scratches near the lock, tiny, haphazard marks, as though someone had forced it open with great urgency and little skill. He glanced back at Filton, who looked stricken. This was not so earlier, sir. I swear it. Poirot nodded. Then someone wishes access to what lies beyond, and they do not wish to be seen. He pushed the door open. A gust of cold air swept out, carrying the faint scent of dust and old wood. The east wing stretched into darkness, save for a flickering lamp at the far end, abandoned hastily, its flame struggling to stay alive. Poirot moved toward it, footsteps silent and controlled. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped. A door on the left stood open, not fully, but enough to suggest recent entry. Poirot motioned Filton to remain behind him and approached with deliberate caution. He pressed a finger to his lips, then nudged the door wider. Inside lay a small sitting room, long unused. Dust gathered thickly on the mantel, and pale sheets draped over furniture like ghostly silhouettes. But it was the open drawer of a writing desk that caught Poirot's attention. He crossed the room, examining it closely. Papers had been rifled through, tossed aside in haste. A small wooden box lay on its side, its contents spilled. Buttons, a tarnished brooch, an empty envelope. Poirot lifted the envelope. Its flap bore remnants of red sealing wax, wax identical to the residue he found in the drawing-room fireplace. "Ah," he whispered. "So the thread continues." Filton whispered from the doorway. "Sir, do you believe the murderer came here searching for something?" Poirot nodded, perhaps searching for what Sir Benedict hid, or verifying what he destroyed. He held the envelope over the lantern, examining the broken seal. Something was written faintly on the front, smudged but legible enough. "To keep until the time is right." Poirot felt a chill, one deeper than the cold of the unused room. "Filton," he murmured. "Fetch Lady Clarissa. I require her presence immediately." Filton hesitated. "And the guests? Should they remain where they are?" Poirot's voice sharpened. "No one must leave the drawing-room, not for any reason." Filton hurried off. Poirot remained still, eyes fixed on the scattered papers. He sifted through them carefully, hoping for fragments, clues, whispers left behind by the frantic intruder. A notation caught his eye, a corner of stationery bearing Sir Benedict's handwriting. "If discovered, everything will unravel." Poirot folded the fragment and tucked it into his pocket. The shadows in the room seemed to press in around him now, thick with secrets. He extinguished the flickering lamp, leaving only the lantern's glow, and turned back into the corridor. As he approached the entrance again, Lady Clarissa appeared, breathless but composed, Filton close behind. "Monsieur Poirot?" Filton said it was urgent. Poirot held up the envelope. "Madame, does this room hold any significance to you?" She glanced around, puzzled. "Not particularly. It belonged to my late husband's aunt. It has not been used in years." "Did Sir Benedict ever come here?" "I cannot imagine why he would." Poirot studied her face, its tension, its honesty. He sensed no duplicity, only confusion and growing fear. "Madame," he said gently, "someone searched this room tonight. They forced the door and rifled the desk, and they left behind this." He handed her the envelope. Her eyes widened. "This seal, this color." She looked up sharply. "It resembles the wax Benedict used for private correspondence." "Just so." She looked around the dim corridor. "But what would anyone hope to find here?" "That, madame," Poirot said softly, "is what I intend to discover." They returned to the drawing-room together. As Poirot entered, every face turned toward him, fear sharpening some features, defiance hardening others. The fire had burned lower, casting long, tremulous shadows along the walls, as though the house had grown darker in his short absence. Poirot approached the center of the room. "Mes amis," he began calmly, "someone has taken advantage of the storm and the confusion to search the east wing. They forced a locked door and ransacked a desk. The intent was not random, it was purposeful." Markham's eyes flashed. Who would risk such a thing with everyone assembled here? Poirot met his gaze evenly. Someone who hoped to slip away unnoticed. Someone who feared what Sir Benedict might have hidden. Julian stepped forward. "Did they find it?" Poirot's voice grew quiet. If they had found what they sought, they would not still be searching. A single beat of silence followed. Then Eloise whispered, trembling, "Monsieur Poirot." "Does that mean the murderer is becoming desperate?" Poirot looked toward the corridor, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Oui, mademoiselle," he said. "And desperation makes even the clever grow careless." A nervous hush settled over the drawing-room as Poirot's final words faded into the crackling quiet. The storm outside pressed harder against the windows, its relentless drumming matching the tension that now pulsed among the guests. No one dared move. Each seemed to fear that even a shift of breath might draw unwanted scrutiny. Poirot paced slowly before the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze drifting thoughtfully from one face to another. He was not merely observing. He was listening to the rhythm of their fear, the breaks in their composure, the subtle betrayals of human nature. "It is interesting," he murmured, "how desperation drives one not toward order, but toward chaos. And chaos, mes amis, leaves traces." He turned toward the window briefly, as though gauging the storm for its intentions. The intruder sought something specific, not jewels, not money, something that threatened them, something they feared Sir Benedict had hidden, or left for another to discover. Julian swallowed audibly. "Something connected to the letter he burned?" Poirot nodded. "To the letters, monsieur. There were two. The ash tells us this, and the sealed envelope in the east wing suggests he kept copies, or fragments, far from the eyes of those he mistrusted." Mrs. Trent shivered. "But why hide anything there? That wing is unused?" "Precisely," Poirot replied softly. "Its very abandonment makes it an ideal refuge for secrets." Markham crossed his arms defensively. "So whoever searched the wing tonight hoped to retrieve something Benedict had hidden there." "Or to confirm its absence," Poirot said. "Either way, their anxiety grows." Eloise's voice trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, if they grow anxious, does that mean they might act again?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "It is a possibility we must not ignore." A ripple of fear traveled through the room. Even Dr. Wycombe, whose earlier composure had resembled stone, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot studied him for a lingering moment before addressing the group at large. "There is something else to consider. Sir Benedict did not burn the second document in the study. That burning occurred here, in this room." Poirot gestured toward the fireplace. "In the presence of others. A bold act, but one disguised by timing. When the fire flared, someone fed it, not with logs, as Eloise believed, but with paper." Julian's eyes widened. "Then the murderer was beside us when it happened." Poirot nodded slowly. "Standing no more than a few paces from Sir Benedict." Eloise gasped. "But the shadow, he mentioned a shadow." Poirot raised a finger. "A shadow that should not be cast." "Yes, a telling remark. Benedict saw someone near the fire whom he did not expect to be there. Perhaps someone reaching into the flames, or someone withdrawing a hand too quickly." Lady Clarissa paled. "Then he recognized them." Poirot inclined his head. "I believe so." Mrs. Trent let out a strained breath. "And that is why he looked so frightened when he walked away from the fire." Her voice faltered. "Yes," Poirot said quietly, "and why he died moments later." A heavy silence descended, broken only by the restless storm and the fading crackle of the dying fire. Poirot gave the guests a moment to absorb the implications before continuing. "I would ask each of you now, did any among you approach the fireplace in the moments before Sir Benedict did?" No one answered. The quiet stretched uneasily. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Come, mes amis. Silence is not a shield. It is a confession." Markham stepped forward abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You cannot expect us to remember every step." Poirot cut him off with a gentle but commanding lift of his hand. "Monsieur, you have been most impatient this evening. Impatience in such circumstances signals not frustration, but fear." Markham stiffened. "Fear? Of what? I have nothing to hide." "Then answer the question," Poirot said simply. "Were you near the fire?" Markham hesitated. A flicker, barely a second, but enough. "No," he said finally. Poirot studied him but did not press. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Trent. "And you, Madame?" She shook her head. "I remained with Lady Clarissa." Lady Clarissa nodded uncertainly. "Yes, Yes, she was beside me the entire time. Poirot's gaze lingered on Clarissa's expression, her uncertainty, her attempt to appear certain. He tucked the detail away. Dr. Wickham spoke next, his voice tight. I was not near the fireplace. I returned only after the scream. Poirot nodded again, absorbing the information without revealing its weight. Finally, his attention drifted to Eloise. She trembled, but met his eyes. I was walking toward the fire, but I never reached it. And Julian? Poirot asked. Julian shook his head quickly. I was at the piano. I swear it. Poirot paced again, silent, thinking. Then he stopped suddenly, his eyes brightening with a spark of revelation. There is something strange, he said quietly. Something that does not align. The guests stiffened collectively. Poirot turned to Eloise. Mademoiselle, you said the fire flared brightly just before Sir Benedict fell, yes? Yes, she whispered. And yet, Poirot continued, the fire has burned low ever since. No added logs, no stoking. Only paper could cause such a brief, violent flare. He turned toward the group. But only someone standing near it could have fed the flames. Markham exhaled sharply. We know that already. Non, Poirot said, raising a finger. We know the fire flared. But there is more. When the flare occurred, someone here reacted, far more strongly than the others. He looked from face to face, studying each expression. Someone startled. Someone whose fear betrayed that they had not expected the fire to react so fiercely. Julian swallowed. Who? Poirot let the suspense hang for a moment. Then, with the soft precision of a blade slipping into its sheath, he said, the one person who should not have flinched at all. The one who already knew what had been thrown into the flames. A collective shudder passed through the room. Every eye darted from one guest to another, searching for the smallest betrayal of fear, the slightest hesitation that might reveal guilt. The fire crackled weakly, its dying embers casting unsteady shadows that seemed to twitch in anticipation. Poirot remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed not on the flames, but on the faces that reflected them. He had delivered the accusation indirectly, but the truth hovered in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Eloise swallowed hard. Monsieur Poirot. Who was it? Who flinched? Poirot's gaze swept the room. Methodical, calm, almost scholarly in its precision. When the fire flared, only one among you reacted with true surprise. Not the surprise of witnessing something unusual, but the surprise of witnessing something unintended. That person expected the flames to rise only modestly. Instead, they leapt fiercely, because Sir Benedict had added something thicker, heavier than the intruder expected. Julian looked bewildered. But who? Poirot's eyes came to rest at last on Lady Clarissa. She stiffened, not dramatically, but with the subtle rigidity of someone whose breath has turned to ice. Her lips parted in disbelief, yet no words emerged. It was Mrs. Trent who gasped first. Clarissa? No, that cannot be. Lady Clarissa shook her head slowly, clutching the edge of a nearby chair. Monsieur Poirot, this is surely a misunderstanding. Why would you suspect me? Poirot approached her gently, not accusing, but guiding. Madame, your reaction to the flare was instantaneous, instinctive. You stepped back, lifting your hand as though shielding yourself. Others gasped, yes, but only you recoiled. Say, Clarissa's composure trembled. I was startled, that is all. Non, Poirot said softly. You were startled because the document you thought had burned earlier did not burn fully. When Sir Benedict fed the second paper into the fire, it ignited with intensity, revealing its material, its thickness, its importance. You recognized the flare as the reaction of something you had tried to destroy. Markham's eyes widened. Wait, Clarissa, are you saying she was the one who burned the letter? Poirot nodded. Not the final letter, but one before it. The one Sir Benedict burned in the study was his attempt to salvage what remained after your interference. Clarissa pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. No, you do not understand. I was trying to help him. Poirot lifted an inquisitive brow. Help him? How? Her voice faltered at first, but desperation lent her strength. Benedict came to me earlier, distraught. He said he had made a terrible mistake, one that compromised everything he valued. He begged me to hide a particular document for safekeeping, but when I saw what it contained, I panicked. I thought if he destroyed it, he might be free of whatever danger pursued him. Poirot's eyes softened. And so you attempted to burn it yourself? Clarissa nodded, tears filling her eyes. Yes. I took it to the drawing room when no one was present. I fed it to the flames. But it did not burn completely. Benedict must have found a remnant. He confronted me privately, terrified someone else had seen it. Julian stepped closer, voice shaking. What did the document say? Clarissa looked stricken. I cannot tell you. Benedict swore me to secrecy. I thought destroying it would save him. Poirot held up a hand. Madame, your secrecy protects only the murderer now, not Sir Benedict. Clarissa's tears spilled, her voice cracking. You must believe me. I did not kill him. I would never. Poirot regarded her intently. I do not believe you intended him harm, but you kept a secret that allowed harm to reach him. He paused. However, you are not the one who stabbed him. A collective exhale echoed through the room. Relief from some, shock from others, confusion from most. Markham frowned. Then why accuse her? Poirot shook his head. I did not accuse her of murder. I accused her of knowing what burned, and that knowledge tells us something very important. Eloise stepped forward timidly. What does it tell us? Poirot turned toward the entire group. It tells us that the murderer did not know the contents of the letter. They feared only what Sir Benedict might reveal, thus their frantic search in the East Wing. But Clarissa, she knew the content, and that knowledge frightened her, yes, but not enough to kill. Wycomb's voice broke. Then who? Poirot's gaze shifted to him, subtle but unmistakable. Dr. Wycombe, you examined Benedict's wound with unnatural haste. You called it precise. Expert, but earlier, when I questioned your location, your answers grew colder, not calmer. Wycombe stiffened. My expertise is not a crime, Poirot continued, and yet the killer must have known how to strike in such a way that death came swiftly, without struggle. Someone who could stand close to Benedict without raising alarm. Someone he did not see as a threat, even after recognizing the shadow near the fire. Markham whispered. A shadow. The shadow of someone who stands tall, perhaps. Someone Benedict trusted? Poirot nodded slowly. Oui. Someone who approached under the guise of concern. Someone who followed him to the fire. Someone who believed Clarissa had failed to destroy the document and killed before Benedict could speak. Wycomb's face tightened. You suggest... Poirot raised a hand. Doctor, Sir Benedict withdrew support from your research because he suspected fraudulent results. He confronted you 2 weeks ago. And when he received proof of your deception, you feared exposure. Wycomb's mask cracked. Eloise shrieked. Julian stepped back. Clarissa covered her mouth. Poirot finished quietly, inexorably. You, Dr. Wycombe, are the only one with the skill to strike the fatal blow, the motive strong enough for murder, and the calm to feign certainty over a wound you yourself delivered. Wycombe took a step backward, breath quickening. Poirot's voice turned to steel. And now, monsieur, it is time you explain the final truth of Sir Benedict's death. Dr. Wycombe's retreat was small, only a single step backward, yet in that single movement the room understood everything. The carefully maintained mask of professional detachment slipped from his face like a cracked veneer revealing the panic beneath. His eyes darted from Poirot to the door, measuring chances, before settling again upon the detective with grim resignation. "You construct fantasies, Poirot," he said, though his voice wavered. "Elegant, yes, but fantasies nonetheless." Poirot approached him with gentle precision. "No, doctor, it is reality that is elegant. Human nature is simple, complex only to those who lie to themselves. You feared exposure, and fear, when combined with ruin, becomes a ruthless motivator." Wycomb's jaw clenched. "You cannot prove anything." "But of course I can," Poirot replied softly. "Sir Benedict recorded his suspicions in the notebook. He wrote of discrepancies in your financial reports, inconsistencies in the patient data for your experiments, even the testimony of a former associate who warned him of your methods. When he confronted you, you begged him for silence. But Benedict, ever the moral man, decided to expose you." Wycomb's face twisted. "He would have destroyed everything I worked for." "And so," Poirot continued, "when you saw Clarissa's failed attempt to save him through destruction, you realized Benedict had not relinquished the evidence after all. You followed him to the fire. You watched him feed the last fragment into the flames. When he turned away, shaken by the shadow he glimpsed, your shadow, you struck." Eloise whimpered. Julian swallowed tears. Mrs. Trent turned her face away. Poirot's voice softened, almost mournful. "You counted on the weakness of the storm, the confusion of the room, the chaos Clarissa's earlier act had caused. But what you could not anticipate was that a man newly dead still speaks, through keys he carries, through ash he leaves behind, through the panic he incites in his murderer." Wycomb's breathing grew shallow. "If he still had proof, I had to act. You don't understand. My research was close, on the cusp of recognition. Benedict was going to take everything from me." Poirot nodded slowly. "So you chose the most final solution, a blade slid with precision, quick, quiet, certain. Your knowledge made it possible." Wycombe took another backward step, but Filton was already behind him, blocking any escape. The doctor sagged, defeated. "It didn't have to end like this." Poirot's eyes were steady, but it did. "Because you believed yourself beyond ordinary morality, and Benedict, in uncovering your fraud, returned you to the realm of ordinary men." The door burst open then as the constabulary finally arrived, drenched and breathless from the storm. Poirot gestured calmly toward Wycombe. "Messieurs, you will find your culprit here. He will not resist." Wycombe did not resist. He merely bowed his head as the officers approached and placed him in restraints. As he was led toward the door, thunder rolled like a final verdict across the estate. When the room emptied of tension, Lady Clarissa sank into a chair, pale and shaken. "Monsieur Poirot, had I not interfered with the letter, had I not tried to protect him?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Do not blame yourself, madame. Your fear was misguided, yes, but rooted in affection, not malice. Sir Benedict made his choices, and the truth, once set on its path, cannot be unmade." Julian stepped closer to Poirot, voice uneven. "Will my uncle be remembered for his honor?" "For doing what was right?" "Most assuredly," Poirot said with quiet conviction. "He died because he chose honesty over comfort. In that, he was most brave." Eloise dabbed her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, how did you know, truly know?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mademoiselle, it is always the psychology. A murderer with a blade must also have the mind of a murderer. Wycomb's calm was too complete, his certainty too rehearsed. And when the fire flared, only he did not flinch. Not because he expected it, but because he was already focused on the danger that awaited him if Benedict revealed more." Mrs. Trent exhaled deeply, relief mingling with sorrow. "Then it is over." Poirot glanced toward the dim corridor where the echoes of the night still lingered. "Yes, madame. It is over. Order has returned. He moved toward the fireplace, adjusting the screen with his customary precision, restoring symmetry to the room. His eyes softened as he watched the last ember fade. Human folly, he murmured, is like the flame. Left untended, it consumes everything, but with a little order, a little logic, it can be controlled. Lady Clarissa stepped beside him. You have our gratitude, Monsieur Poirot. Emberlight Park will not forget this night. Poirot offered a courteous bow. My duty, madame, is only to the truth. With that, he retrieved his coat and hat, straightened his tie, and allowed Filton to escort him to the front door. The storm had softened to a fine mist. His driver, surprised but relieved, greeted him with warmth. Poirot paused once more before stepping out. Come, he said gently. We have given these shadows enough of our time. And with impeccable composure, and just the faintest philosophical smile, Hercule Poirot departed Emberlight Park, leaving order in his wake.